Let me present to you our colleague Hugo Simkin, who gives another flavor, another disciplinary dimension to our meeting, because he is a professor of social psychology. He is a Felipe Fiorellino Scientific Foundation researcher and an UBA professor of social psychology, head of Division 10 Social Psychology at the Association for the Advancement of Psychological Science, and a member of the Inter-American Society of Psychology. He has publications in the area of social psychology in journals and recognized trajectory and participation in conference proceedings in the national and international scope. His research interests includes personality, spirituality, mental health, and of course, migration, and that's why he's here today. So let's warmly welcome Hugo Simkin. Hugo, you have a quarter of an hour to 20 minutes for your talk, and after that we'll have the discussion.
Well, I want to thank you and Ronan for having me here. And well, as you mentioned before, I researched the relationship between spirituality, mental health, and in this study, migration. As you already know, immigrants come to Israel for different reasons, such as religious, ideological, political, or economic reasons. And within Latin American migrants, economical and political reasons, as we have been seeing in all these conferences, are among the most prevalent ones. Let me just remind you once more: the 1966 military dictatorship, the 2001 economical and political crisis in Argentina, or the current economical and political crisis in Venezuela. Psychological research has shown that some events, certain events such as migration, can become central to personal identity, core components for personal history and for personal identity. According to Bernstein, for example, if a central event in personal identity is perceived somehow as traumatic, it can be related to lower mental health, more frequent negative emotional experience, less frequent positive emotional experiences, and lower life satisfaction. So in this sense, the first question of the study is the following: is migration considered as a central event in personal identity for Latin American migrants? And in such case, considering the role of political and economic factors that we have been deeply discussing for the whole conferences, considering these political and economical factors in Latin American migration, is this central event perceived somehow as traumatic? Besides, how does migration as a central event relate to mental health, subjective well-being, positive and negative emotional experiences, and satisfaction with life? On the other hand, one of the most interesting aspects of migration to Israel is its relationship with religion and spirituality. It's not the same as any other migration experiences. It is related, or it could be related, to religion and spirituality. And one of the most relevant questions within psychology of religion is how religion and spirituality relate to mental health. Does religion or spirituality help people cope with life stressors, or do they make them more vulnerable to develop mental disorders? So in this sense, the aim of this study is to know if there are relationships between the centrality of events, in this case migration, religion, spirituality, and subjective well-being, meaning for that, in psychology, positive and negative emotional experiences, satisfaction with life, in Latin American immigrants in Israel. In order to do that, we conducted a quantitative study cross-sectional study in psychology, we use lots of psychological measures. And in this case, I'm going to take a minute to comment on these measures. The first measure, in order to measure centrality of event, I used the 7-item Likert type scale developed by Bernstein and Rabin in 2006. In particular, a Spanish adaptation I conducted with Susana Solini, which is my former PhD thesis advisor, and Gisela Matrangolo, my currently PhD student. And we'll give one example of one item of this 7-item scale. It says, I feel that this event has become part of my identity. It has 7 items. This is one example. Remember, it is a Likert type scale, being 1 completely disagree, 5 completely agree. The second measure, psychological measure, was affect balance scale, which was developed by Bradburn in 1969. Again, modified a little bit by Waterton in 1983. And I used a Spanish adaptation also with Asolini and Mercedes Olivera, which is another PhD student in our research team. And one of these items says, for example, it measures positive and negative affect, positive and negative emotional experiences. And one example of those items is, have you ever felt depressed or unhappy, right? To measure satisfaction with life, we used Diener, Emos, Larsen, and Griffin's 1985 satisfaction with life scale, a Spanish adaptation conducted for other colleagues, Moyano, Martinez, Tais, and Pilar Muñoz in 2013. An example of these scales, 5-item scale, very short. It says, if I could live my life all over, I would change almost nothing. And the last measure is called Assessment of Spirituality and Religious Sentiment Scale. It was developed in 2004 by Ralph Piedmont, a professor in Loyola Maryland University in the United States. And a Spanish adaptation, I worked with Dr. Piedmont a couple of years ago. And it's a little more complex, this scale. It says it has 2 factors, being one, spiritual transcendence, and the second one, religious sentiments. And religious sentiments has 2 facets, being one, religious involvement. One example of religious involvement could be how frequently do you attend religious services. It measures mostly religious attendance to services and religious practices within formal and traditional religious institutions. And the second facet of religious sentiments is called religious crisis, and measures conflicts between a religious individual and God or his religious or her religious community. For example, I feel God is punishing me. The spiritual transcendence scale, subscale, measures 3 facets. If I have time, I will go deeply in this, but I don't want to take much time commenting about this. But one example of spiritual transcendence could be, there is an order to the universe that transcends human thinking. So he's thinking spirituality and religions as different psychological constructs. So I took these measures in 204 Latin American migrants between 18 and 80 years old, being the mean 48 and the standard deviation 15 years almost. There are 34% men and 65% women. Migration took over in this sample from 1979 to 2019, to this year, with a media of 2006 and a standard deviation of 12. Most of them are from Argentina, but there is a 17% of Colombia, 7% Chile, Bolivia, Cuba, Ecuador, Guatemala, Mexico, República Dominicana. Almost every Latin American country, I have to say, small portions of some of the countries, but it should be assessed in future studies. So the first analysis is a correlation, a classical correlation analysis. I'm going to focus mostly on centrality of event, because there is a lot of data to show and not much time to do so. But as you can see, centrality of event is linked to satisfaction with life, to positive affect. Universality and brain fulfillment are facets of the spiritual transcendence of scale. I can go deeply in this issue later. Religious crisis negatively, and religious involvement. So the only variable that's linked negatively with centrality of event is religious crisis. Then we try to conduct a regression analysis. Do you remember? I guess that correlation that not implies causation. So we try to imply or to try to prove some causation, if statistics allow me to do so. And we try to see which of these constructs or variables explain somehow the mental health variables, being such satisfaction with life and positive and negative affect. As you can see, satisfaction with life is mostly explained by centrality of event, religious and religious crisis mostly, and positive affect is mostly explained by also centrality of event, spirituality, in this case, religious involvement, and religious crisis. We did not find any relationships with negative affect. It is something quite interesting, and I'm going to go deeply regarding that issue in short. Actually, what we were trying to do is use structural equation modeling with EQS to prove if centrality of event has somehow a mediating role between spirituality, religion, and health. We weren't able to do so because of the small sample. We need to increase the sample to use this kind of statistics. But as long as we were able to do so, we ran a regression analysis between spirituality and religion, and centrality of event, which is the variable we understand is having a mediating role with mental health, in this case subjective well-being, and we found that somehow spirituality and religious crisis is explaining part of the variance in centrality of event. I think that one of the main results is that, as you already seen, in this case, centrality of event, migration as a centrality of event, wasn't perceived as somehow traumatic, because it was linked positively with positive affect and satisfaction with life. This is why, regarding the concluding remarks, we came to find that migration is a central event in Latin American migrants, at least in this sample. Thus, that spirituality, religious crisis, and centrality of event impact on positive affect and satisfaction with life. And that negative affect is not explained by spirituality, religious sentiments, or centrality of event, contrary to what we would have expected. We think that the role of purpose in life should be assessed. As Piedmont defined spirituality, it is very much linked to the efforts of building meaning within a scatological context. That means in the end of our lives or in the end of times. And meaning is very much linked to find purpose. Purpose may help us experience positive emotions if we have purpose, if we have something to live for, but not necessarily make us invulnerable to experience negative emotions. So I don't want to jump to conclusions, but we could later on find this kind of discussions with newer results, larger samples, and different scales. We have to come to some limitations, relevant limitations to our study. The sample size is the first limitation. It's a small sample for now, and we need to increase this sample in order to run further analysis, for example, structural question modeling. Also, design should be reviewed. I think it's important to have more qualitative reviews, and which is a depth I think we psychologists have. We rely a lot in quantitative measures, and in order to build those measures, there is, I think, that's my personal opinion, not necessarily too much qualitative research being done. So I think qualitative research could improve building in psychology better measures, better psychological measures. And regarding this issue, I have to say that I have to quote a professor here, Eugene Tartakovsky, which is has been working for a long time in motivation for migration. I think, contrary to what expected, centrality of event had a positive effect on mental health. I was expecting that it was negatively linked to mental health because of literature. But I think if we can come up to build some measure that can, as Tartakovsky has done, measure motivation for migration, we may be able to differentiate different kinds of groups and different kinds of centrality of events in Latin American samples. I think that's I'm on time, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugo, also for being such with Prussian discipline, holding on to time, and that gives us ample of time to discuss your paper. Who would like to start with a question? Oh no, that's the cameraman. Okay. Yes, Ari. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Hugo. So I guess you are referring to Latin American migrants to this country.
Yes.
Okay, and you were saying, if I quote you, centrality of events, spirituality, religion, and subjective well-being might have a positive effect.
Well, according to these results, centrality of event does have a positive effect. Spirituality also. Within religious sentiments, you should differentiate religious crisis and religious involvement, and of course, religious crisis, meaning for that the idea that we are being punished by God has, of course, a negative effect on.
Now, so my question is whether you should draw distinction, going back to the cases I came late of, like Argentine Jews youth that came to this country, and I can give my personal example. I came in 79 out of option. So I would fit your, I'm celebrating 40 years in this madhouse, but I love this country, right? So it might fit, but the question is whether you would come to the same conclusions for those who were compelled to come here, right? That they did not come out of choice, out of Zionism, etc. So maybe that might be, because, right, there might be migrants out of pollution, and there might be migrants that came to this country because they had no choice. Interrogation mark.
Yes, you can answer right away. We don't have
Okay.
at the moment.
Well, that's exactly what I think. I was thinking that I was going to find negative correlations between centrality of event, but I'm thinking that as Tartakovsky has been researching on we should differentiate different kind of migrants, different kind of motivations for migration, and I think we are going to find different results if we can discriminate different type of migrants with this sample. These are preliminary results, and we should continue. But totally agree.
Yeah, Leonardo.
I want a more explanation about the concept of spirituality.
Sure. Well, it's a very interesting question. I think regarding depression, for example, we psychologists pretty much agree on how to define and how to measure depression. Of course, there's always debates, there's always discussion, but I could say that there is more consensus on how to define depression than how to define spirituality. So there is actually no consensus. There is lots big debates regarding how to measure and how to define spirituality. Regarding Piedmont's definition, again, Piedmont defines spirituality as an effort to build meaning within a eschatological context, meaning for this, the end of life or the end of times. Within spirituality, I didn't go deeper on this because of time, but he distinguished three different facets. One of these facets is universality, and is, for example, the item I just read, being this the belief that there is some order in the universe that transcends human thinking. The second facet is called prayer fulfillment. It doesn't involve actually praying as a religious prayer, because he's not thinking on exclusively religious prayers. He's thinking more than a way of connecting yourself personally to a larger reality, being that meditation, contemplating nature, or whatever activity you may engage on in order to feel connected with a larger reality. Could be prayer, but also could be not being praying. And the third facet is connectedness, which means the idea of being connected not only to humankind, but also with people that may have died. So, of course, there's always lots of debates regarding this. There's no consensus. Actually, this is one of the measures that it's more used in social psychology. It's one of the more agreed scales, and this is the definition Piedmont gives of spirituality. Regarding religion, he understands more of the way spirituality expresses itself within formal and traditional religious institutions.
Ranan.
Yeah, the gender perspective was missing here. No, I was saying that the gender perspective was missing here, because in many studies of religious practices, at least, scholars tend to make a differentiation between women and men. So I would like you to comment on this.
Yes, it's also a depth of this study. We're expecting to contemplate gender differences. We didn't right now in the study, first because of the sample. We think we need to work on a larger sample. Also because we have more women on the sample than men. So I didn't want to jump into any conclusions until I have a larger sample. But of course, there's always going to be work. We are expecting to find gender difference when we get to have a larger sample.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hugo. And